Hey everybody, this is Rykard here again, and welcome to another Pokemon Teams video. Today's video is going to be all about a UU team that I have been using for quite some time now and have had a lot of success with and a lot of fun using. This team not only features some of my favorite Pokemon, but also features some unique movesets that I have never tried before until I made this team, and also some Pokemon I've not really used before until making this team and have found that they're actually really great and work well together. To start this team building process though, the first Pokemon that I chose was Umbreon, for obvious reasons, in that it's my favorite Pokemon. So I wanted to use this Pokemon in general, and found its defensive capabilities are absolutely phenomenal, which many of you probably already know. Umbreon has amazing defenses and also access to a lot of support moves through the use of Wish and also Heal Bell, which helps keep my team healthy and surviving for a long period of time. But Umbreon does have some flaws in that it is weak to a lot of really common physical attackers, such as those packing fighting type and bug type moves. In order to combat this, I needed a Pokemon that could not only be a great physical wall, but also a Pokemon that could resist those types of attacks, and found that running a Violet Gligar did just that. In addition to helping Umbreon, Gligar also works extremely well on its own, being the Pokemon on my team that sets up Stealth Rock to make hazards a problem for my opponent, and also having access to U-Turn, which allows this Pokemon some really great utility in allowing me to get some switch initiative that would help benefit my team by switching into another defensive Pokemon on it, or an attacker that is able to deal with something that my opponent has. Furthermore, this Pokemon also has its own sustainability through the use of Roost, meaning that I don't always have to rely on Umbreon to help it out defensively because it can heal for itself, whereas Umbreon's Wishing can be used to help out some other Pokemon on my team. Furthermore, I needed a Pokemon on this team that could help round out not only the weaknesses of the Gligar Umbreon core, which I did find to be very good on its own, but also deal with some problems that I was running into when I was initially kind of team building. And the main thing that I kept running into all the time were setup sweepers that happened to pack certain attacks that were just a problem for my team. And the main one, honestly, in this regard is Suicune. Now, Suicune is such a common Pokemon in UU, I think it pretty much runs the tier. And because of its calm mindset being so potent and so powerful, it was a big issue for my team initially, and I had to try other things to deal with it. Using Calm Mind Reuniclus to combat that was the first idea that I had, because I could use Psyshock to hit its unboosted side if I was ever in a Calm Mind war with Suicune. But that ended up being pretty unreliable, and really Reuniclus didn't do much other than that, which, didn't really pan out too well. I eventually settled on using a Jellicent with a ton of speed investment and access to Taunt to basically prevent my opponent from even having the opportunity to set up, and also just completely wall Suicune, because most times the Calm Mind set with Suicune is only packing one move, and with Jellicent's immunity to water type attacks, it's able to completely shut down that set. In addition, it also has a really awesome ghost typing, which helps prevent against spin blockers, even though the most common rapid spinner in the tier is Blastoise, which does pack the Dark Pulse. So that is a bit of an issue, but if I ever have to predict a rapid spin or something, I could sometimes find a safe switch into Jellicent. But its typing in general is just really good, and then having access to Scald Burns is also really useful. Furthermore, though, once I had this kind of trio of defensive Pokemon locked in, I needed some way to build some offense on this team. And the way that I went about doing this actually was really, really odd, because I ended up building an offense through using a Pokemon defensively. And this is where my Assault Vest specially defensive Mienshao came into play, which some of you are very familiar with at this point. And I'll go a little bit more into detail on it, and I even have a whole video dedicated to this Pokemon and its capabilities. But this set came out of this team. It ended up being amazing for dealing with a ton of Pokemon that my opponents would typically pack that I didn't necessarily have a super safe switch into, because they typically will often pack moves that could threaten out something. So for example, Life Orb Hydreigon, typically in addition to also making use of Draco Meteor, would often have access to Superpower and also U-Turn to potentially deal with Umbreon, even though Umbreon could take its special hits amazingly well. And other Pokemon kind of fall into this category as well. Well, fortunately, Assault Vest Mienshao can deal with a huge variety of those, and not only switch in safely, but also recover the health back when I switch out through the use of Regenerator, but also even take out some of the Pokemon that are seen as special attacking threats, such as Hydreigon and Porygon Z, among others. So not only is this Pokemon able to take the hits, but he can also dish them out. And why this Pokemon is so offensive and so defensive at the same time just boggles my mind at how I came up with this. So it's just super awesome using this Pokemon. But furthermore, I didn't really have too strong of an offense built with just Mienshao, even though it did have access to U-turn to help me out and also knock off the best move in the game. But I wanted some other type to make use of, so I chose Entei, mainly for the reason that my team already had 2 Pokemon weak to Fairy type moves, and I didn't really have a resist to that. Now, Entei isn't necessarily the Pokemon I want to be switching in on Fairy-type attacks, because a lot of Fairy-type Pokemon also pack status, like Toxic on Sylveon and Florges. So this Pokemon is useful for that, but it really shines in its ability to work in combination with Umbreon by getting Wish Passes that Umbreon provides for it. By doing that, I not only allow Entei to be extremely useful at allowing it to survive longer in battle because it also is weak to Stealth Rock, but it also allows me a free opportunity to switch in on a lot of things that it typically normally wouldn't be able to switch in onto. Furthermore, it also has access to Sacred Fire, which is honestly the main selling point between using this Pokemon and using something like Arcanine, which fills a similar role because they have a very similar move pool. Basically, Sacred Fire is just too good of a move to pass up. With a 50% chance to burn, it's just amazing, and I could not use that. In addition, it also has Priority, which allows me to clean up at the end of a match if things have been worn down, which is kind of the goal of my team, honestly. And Entei is just fantastic for that reason. Finally, the last Pokemon that I picked on this team was mainly because I wanted a Rapid Spinner, and there were not really too many options in UU to make use of. I could go with Mega Blastoise, but I just didn't really find it to be that beneficial to my team, and I already had a pretty good water type, so I didn't really need that. I tried Tentacruel out for a while, which yet is another water type, but it does have some extra utility and Acid Spray and things like that, but it still just didn't quite fit my team right because I was still weak to a lot of physical attackers that Gligar couldn't handle due to its ability to either be taunted by them, get flinched by them over and over again, which frequently happened, or just have a typing that is weak to those type of attacks, such as physical attackers that, set up, such as Feraligatr, among other things, and also Crawdaunt and stuff like that. So I needed a Pokemon that was able to deal with that, and what I ended up eventually settling on was Avalugg. And this didn't come by on my own. I did have some help with this, mainly because I saw one of my friends using this Pokemon in OU to combat a lot of physical attackers. But Avalugg with a Rocky Helmet turned out to be amazing for this team and allowed it to basically handle a lot of the weaknesses that Gligar could not handle on its own as my sole physically defensive Pokemon. So this Pokemon only rapid spins, but also can take those physical hits and get a lot of residual damage through the use of the Rocky Helmet, and in its own way can also use Recover to get a lot of that HP back. So it ended up being a perfect fit to kind of round off my sort of bulky but more so balanced offensive defensive team. And I ended up just really liking the way all these played well together, and there's a lot of really intricate things that this team can do and deal with in a variety of interesting ways that I was actually very surprised by, because I did not imagine it would have as much synergy as it does. A lot of people also have asked me, well, where's your Mega? And honestly, this team doesn't need a Mega evolution to function the way it does, and it's just perfectly fine without it, and I'm super happy that I don't even need to rely on that to, have a really effective team. But to get a little bit more in depth on some of these Pokemon, we're going to start off by taking a look at Umbreon. As far as Umbreon is concerned, there really isn't a lot more to say about it than what you'd expect when you see this Pokemon. It's a specially defensive set with 232 EVs into its HP and 252 EVs into its special defense to max it out along with a calm nature. The other thing that I do a little bit differently with pretty much all my Pokemon, as you will notice, is I do run at quite a bit more speed than most people usually do, mainly because all the added bulk from max HP really isn't entirely necessary, and I'd rather my Pokemon just be a little bit faster than some other things that share the same speed as them. So this ensures that in case I'm ever matched up against something else with base 65 speed, as you see right here, Umbreon is pretty much guaranteed to outspeed it. In addition, I'm running Leftovers to help me have some more passive recovery, and also the ability Synchronize to allow Umbreon to synchronize a status over to my opponent if it's trying to status something on my team, or even switch in on a Scald Burn or something like that and switch that over as well. All in all though, the moves are also pretty much what you'd expect. Foul Play to do some damage using my opponent's physical attack, Heal Bell to get rid of any statuses that any of my teammates have received, Wish to recover my own health as well as another Pokemon on my teams, and also Protect to guarantee that Wish lands, or to also protect for some residual damage if I am able to status my opponent through the use of Synchronize on Umbreon or a status from some other Pokemon on my team. All in all, though, this is pretty much what you'd expect to see from a standard Umbreon, just a little bit more speed to make it my own and faster than things that it normally wouldn't be. As for Gligar, this Pokemon also runs very similarly to how you would expect it to be, with just some minor differences. First of all, we're obviously going to be running the Eviolite item to increase both its physical and special defense, and running the ability Immunity to make it so that this Pokemon cannot be poisoned. Furthermore, its EV spread is designed to allow this Pokemon to be ridiculously physically bulky, with 208 EVs into its speed, 252 EVs into its physical defense, and with an impish nature to increase its physical defense further, and then I put 48 speed EVs into its speed to make this Pokemon able to outspeed base 90 speed Pokemon. And this is very useful for Gligar because it allows it to be able to U-turn on more things than it normally would be able to a lot safer, thus allowing me the opportunity to get switch initiative or switch into a better wall or attacker to handle the situation that Gligar might be stuck in. Furthermore, it also just allows this Pokemon to outspeed offensively and hit things with Earthquake to take them out before maybe they'd be able to attack, in which they'd expect to be faster than Gligar. So this works a lot of ways, utility-wise with U-turn, and also offensively if I'm just trying to take something out with Earthquake. But as for the moves, in addition to those other two, as I mentioned before, this Pokemon does have access to Stealth Rock, which allows it to set up hazards on my opponent's side of the field, and also Roost to allow it to sustain its HP by itself for long periods in a battle. Moving on to Jellicent, this is where the movesets and EV spread started to get a little bit more interesting for this team. The item of Leftovers and the ability Water Absorb, however, are pretty much what you'd expect to see on this Pokemon. But the EV spread is very unique and kind of something that I worked a lot on to try to find the best way to maximize its bulk, in addition to making it really fast to taunt opponents. So the first thing that I did was I maxed its HP, because with 252 EVs into that stat, you're essentially boosting both your physical and your special defense because you have more HP to take hits with. But then when figuring out where I'm going to put the rest of the EVs, if I'm going to make this Pokemon just a little bit defensive, I noticed that because I was matching up against a lot of Pokemon that were using Psyshock that I was trying to stop their setup, such as Reuniclus and Cresselia, I needed a little bit more EVs into my physical defense to take the Psyshocks a lot better. And so that's why that is there. It allows me to deal with, I think, a +2 Reuniclus or Cresselia and potentially stop their setup and deal with its set another way. But as far as the speed EVs are concerned, I put 140 EVs into that stat along with the timid nature, which is going to give me basically 210 speed, which is enough to outspeed almost all standard sets of Suicune, barring the Subcom Mind set, which that set in itself has its own weaknesses that I can exploit because they typically don't pack rest on that set. So if I'm able to taunt it, break its sub, and then toxic it, then the Suicune can do nothing to me. But barring that set, this pretty much shuts down most Suicune unless they're running way more speed EVs than they normally would, and admittedly that can happen, which does cause this set a little bit of issues. However, overall, this is able to block most Suicunes because they have only one attack, which I'm immune to, or just have no other way of beating this Pokemon. In addition, it also, like I said, stops a bunch of other setup sweepers like Snorlax and Registeel and Cresselia and Reuniclus, etc. But in addition to Taunt, obviously, you get a ton of utility out of Scald, potentially burning things, and then even more utility out of also having the opportunity to use Toxic. And this move in particular is particularly useful against a lot of opposing walls on my opponent's team. And how this works is basically things like Florges and other Jellicent and Vaporeon and other things that typically rely on using Heal Bell or Aromatherapy or other moves to stay alive, I can completely shut them down with Jellicent by taunting them and just putting a Toxic up. And then I can just recover for days, taunt them again, and keep recovering, and they can't do anything about it because they can't heal up or get rid of their status. And that's amazing for this because it allows me to also shut down other walls, and that's possibly one of the biggest things that make Jellicent so useful for this team. Up next with Mienshao, you all are pretty familiar with the set already, hopefully, But for those that don't know, this is an Assault Vest specially defensive Mienshao with Regenerator. So the EV spread that I run on this has 40 EVs into its HP, 216 EVs into its special defense, and then max speed with a Jolly Nature. And the reason for this EV spread is that it gives it its max special bulk possible. That's how it calculated with 40 EVs into its HP and 216 EVs into its special defense. And as many of you know, and I can link you to the other video if you want to see, this thing can live so many different attacks, switch in, and then force something out that would typically be seen as a threatening attacker on the special side. And it's such a fantastic Pokemon to have to switch in at all times, and is able to take down so many other Pokemon on my opponent's teams. You do lose quite a lot of physical attack with this Pokemon, so things you would typically be able to 2-hit KO, you might not be able to, but the trade-off of being able to just switch in so often with this thing, by far, in my opinion, outweighs that for the type of team that I'm using in this video. But their moves are pretty standard on this Pokemon. High Jump Kick to be your main fighting type attack, though a little bit risky because it can miss, and yes, it always happens to me and the worst possible times. Poison Jab to allow you to have some coverage against fairy types. Knockoff because it allows you to remove items and is a strong dark type move to deal with damage to those ghost type Pokemon that want to switch in on your high jump kicks, and because it's just the best move in the game, as I've always been saying. And then U-turn to give you some extra utility, and another little bug type coverage move, which actually has been proving especially useful recently because I've been running into so many Celebi, and U-turn's just amazing for that. Plus, you can also switch in on a Psychic from a Celebi, which is super cool, just to add that to the list of things that Mienshao is able to live, because recently I was up against a Nasty Plot Celebi, and I happened to live just a regular Psychic and force it out because it didn't want to take the U-turn. Fun fact. But this Pokemon is just so useful. Its utility and usefulness just cannot be overstated, and I absolutely love using this set, and it works amazingly for this team. As for my other physical attacker, which I also realize in hindsight should probably be the shiny variant, we have Entei, which packs leftovers as opposed to a choice band, which is pretty much the common set that you are most often going to see with this Pokemon. Leftovers, however, was super useful for me because this Pokemon is weak to Stealth Rock, and being able to recover off some of the health that it would be taking when it switches in on Stealth Rock is immensely useful to increase its survivability and allow it to be just a more potent threat against my opponents. Additionally, its ability Pressure, I had to go with that, obviously, because Flash Fire isn't released, and it's really not a bad ability. It can sometimes be used in certain situations, but more often than not, Pressure is just kind of there because it has to be. As for the EV spread, though, it also is pretty much what it has to be. You're forced to run an Adamant Nature with any Entei that is running Extreme Speed because the event that Extreme Speed comes along with. So I have 252 EVs into its physical attack to max that out, 4 into its special defense just to put that extra EV in there, and then 252 EVs into its speed to max that out as well. In addition, for the moves, I'm running Sacred Fire, Stone Edge, Extreme Speed, and then lastly, Protect, which may seem very weird, but actually comes in handy so often in so many different situations. Plus, Entei has a ridiculously shallow move pool. The only other thing I could theoretically think about running in this move slot is Hidden Power Grass, but with an Adamant Nature, it's really not going to be doing that much damage, even against things like Swampert, so it's not terribly useful. Protect, on the other hand, works very well with a lot of other Pokemon on my team, because I'm able to spread status so easily, so having Entei able to protect on a status move and cause my opponent to take more residual damage over time is immensely useful. It also is used very often to get them into a range where maybe something faster is in, and I can follow up by killing it with Extreme Speed after it's taken the extra damage that it's received from the status. Furthermore, it also, in many situations, as funny as this may be, has helped me deal with other Mienshao because they never expect me to have Protect, and I often am able finding myself to Protect on a high jump kick from a Mienshao, and then can kill it with Extreme Speed on the following turn, which is just a hilarious situation. Furthermore, Protect also works in combination with your own move in the form of Sacred Fire, which, as I mentioned before, has a 50% chance to burn opponents. So overall, this moveset I'm super happy with. I really wouldn't change anything else on that, even though I could see an argument for Hidden Power Grass, but really, just the way that it is, and having Protect is just very useful, especially for Leftovers recovery, as well, just to add this onto everything I've already said, because a lot of the times I can protect for leftovers and get up to a range to where I will then survive another Stealth Rock switch in if I have to. It's just so useful, and running with leftovers has come in handy so often. And last but not least, we have Avalugg, which, as I mentioned before, kind of filled out the last little remaining holes on this team that I noticed in the battles that I had with it. First off, like I mentioned before, we're running the Rocky Helmet to allow this Pokemon to deal damage every single time a move makes contact with this Pokemon. And this works mainly with physical attacks, but there's a couple of other attacks like Grass Knot that also fill into this category, but you pretty much don't want Avalugg taking special hits. Furthermore, the ability Sturdy, while interesting to have, not necessarily will always be the case that you're going to be able to make use of it because of almost always switching in when there's Stealth Rock up to spin them away. But if you're able to recover or get a Wish Pass from Umbreon, you're actually able to make use of this ability quite effectively. And this does come in handy. The other abilities that it gets in the form of Ice Body and Own Tempo don't really come into play very often. So having Sturdy as kind of a secondary security blanket, more or less, is very nice to have when it comes up. As for its EV spread, this Pokemon is just max physical defense, which turns into an absurdly high, over 500 stat for defense. So 232 EVs into HP, 252 EVs into its defense with an impish nature, and then 24 EVs into its speed, which allows it to outspeed base 30 speed Pokemon this Pokemon may be running into. In addition to that, the moveset pretty much covers anything that I would need this Pokemon to be able to. Ice and Ground are amazing attacking types in combination with each other, as we know from Mamoswine, which does a lot of damage no matter when it's in because it has such great type coverage in its Stab. Well, we don't get Stab and Earthquake, but it's still a useful move, especially if there's a Ghost type such as Chandelure that wants to switch it on Avalugg and block a Rapid Spin. I can just kill it with Earthquake, and then I don't even have to worry about it. But in addition to that, obviously having the Recover on this is going to be super useful for Avalugg's survivability. I will often be switching it in on physical attacks and on Stealth Rock like I mentioned before, so being able to recover off that damage is super useful and allows this Pokemon to sustain its survivability through a very long period of time. The amount of defense, though, that this Pokemon has is absolutely absurd. Meaning that it can take attacks that it really just shouldn't be staying in to take, but it can take them anyway and deal a lot of damage in the process. So for example, if you're sitting at around, like 75% of your health, and your opponent brings in a Lucario, Adamant Life Orb Lucario, to try and scare you out, they go for close combat, you take about 60% from that, a little bit more maybe, depending on damage variation, and then you just kill it with Earthquake. And that's just a really cool thing that I find to be fascinating about this Pokemon, and wonder why it's not used more often, just with full physical defense to shut down any single physical attacker. But it's absolutely amazing for this purpose, and makes this Pokemon super awesome for this team, and I absolutely love it. So with that, that's pretty much all that I have to share for you about this team. I hope you all enjoyed, and as always, thanks for watching. If you have any questions or have any use of this team and want to talk about how much you've enjoyed using it or any criticisms, please leave a comment and let me know what you're thinking. But as always, thank you for watching, take care, goodbye, and I will see you all next time.